How's it going? I'm Mike, and this is the English Breakthrough for Germans podcast. In this podcast, I aim to help German speakers who feel stuck with their English, to give them an alternative to learning apps, Volkshochschule courses, and those who feel that their school English wasn't enough, by helping them become independent language learners and discussing useful learning strategies. Mir fallen die Worte nicht ein, das sagen viele meiner Kursteilnehmer. Wenn du das auch manchmal zu deinem Englisch sagst, bist du hier genau richtig. My name's Mike, and I'm originally from Australia, and I teach both English and German. I've been here in Berlin for a total of 12 years. Apart from German, I've also learned Spanish, a little Bulgarian, and I'm currently learning French. So let's get started. Do you like the music? I found this old recording that I made a few years ago. It's a composition of mine, and I thought it might be nice to use. All right, this episode is called How to Become Fluent in a Language, Part 1. So in this podcast episode, I would like to tell you a little bit more about how I learned German. And of course, I don't want to say that this method works for everybody, but it's definitely worked for me here. And I think that everybody who learns a language successfully will have a lot of similarities with what I've been doing. At the end, I'll summarize my story with you and give you some general language learning tips that you can take away for yourself, so that they're based on my journey as a language learner and my experience as a language teacher. It turned out that this was a little bit long, so I've split it up into two parts. So this is part 1 for you now. All right, so how can I start this for you? My first contact with German learning was in school. I learned German for 2 years in school, but I found that nothing really stuck that I learned at this time. I learned it initially in year 7. So in Australia, we say year 7, year 8, instead of grade 7, grade 8. So I was in year 7 and I learned German for 1 term, which is a quarter of a year. And in that year, we also learned French, Japanese, and Chinese. I actually wasn't a very good language student at this time, and I remember I only got 9% in my Chinese exam. But later in school, I took German for another year, and I couldn't really remember so much from this time. The only thing that I could remember years afterwards was the alphabet and how to count in German. My earliest memory of learning German at this time was that some of my fellow students couldn't remember how to pronounce was. They would say, for example, was magst du? It's difficult for me to say, was magst du? I also remember that our German teacher looked up at the old German or map of Germany on the wall, and she said that it was an old map because it still had East and West Germany on it. At the time, this sounded to me like she was just being a perfectionist, like it was an unnecessary detail. But of course, later I developed an interest in history, and I found out that this was a very, very important difference. So it must have been about 1997, 1998. But as I said, all I really remembered after this time was numbers in the alphabet. So why did I decide to learn German later? Well, actually, it started with a decision to learn a foreign language, not German specifically. So, I wanted to learn a language, but I didn't know which language I wanted to learn yet. I first traveled to a non-English speaking country in 2008, so I was 23 years old at this time. Remember, in Australia, it's very far from any other country, so it's more difficult for us to visit other countries. So the first country I visited which didn't speak English was the Philippines, and a company that I was working at the time sent me to Manila. And during this time I became very interested in the idea that there are people from different cultures, people have different perspectives, and there are different cultural references that they grew up with, and that they grew up in a very different world to mine. But I didn't think that I wanted to learn Tagalog. Tagalog is the language that they speak in the Philippines. And then in 2009, I took a trip to Europe, and I spent 3 months in Europe. I visited over 20 cities, including Berlin, And I really, really fell in love with Berlin at this time. So people often ask me, why did you learn German? Why did you move to Germany? But the truth is, I didn't move to Germany. It was Berlin that really attracted me. So I moved to Berlin. And German is the language that people speak in Berlin. So that's the language that I wanted to learn. Maybe if people spoke a different language in Berlin, I would have chosen to learn a different language. So when I returned home from this trip, I decided to enroll in a course in a local community college so I could learn German. At this time, I remember learning the perfect tense in German. So things like ich habe gemacht, ich bin gefahren, ich habe gearbeitet. And I also realized what sounds in German that I found challenging. So the R, for example, in words like Euro, Ulrike, and the most difficult word for me was mehrere. Oh, and of course, I think I saw on the internet at some point this word Streichholzschächtelchen. So that was a word I really wanted to master. So when I was living in Sydney learning German, at that time I discovered shows on YouTube and on the internet. And there were two shows that I really, really loved. Oh, actually, I'll just tell you about one. So there was one show that I really, really loved. It was Kleiner Roter Traktor. This show in English is called Little Red Tractor. It is actually an English show. I didn't realize at the time, but it had been translated into German. To me, it was really, really important to consume some authentic listening materials. So not just using the course book materials, but also finding things that were made for native speakers. So they're not made specifically for language learning. And I later found out that my choice to watch kids' shows was a really, really effective choice for my language learning. I'll tell you a little bit more why. So through my teaching and reading, I know that much of the vocabulary and the interaction between the characters in a show like Little Red Tractor are not just for kids. It's language which you can use at any level of language learning, and you get a lot of repetition of really, really important phrases. Just for fun, before recording this episode of the podcast, I opened YouTube and I watched a few seconds of Little Red Tractor. I found this phrase in an episode. Just think of the time we save by not walking. Now, is it clear that this phrase is from a kid's show? No, it's not. Do you need a grammatical analysis of this sentence? No, because it's really, really clear from the context what's happening. Actually, when you hear that phrase, you can see people in a car. So again, it was, just think of the time we save by not walking. So it's really, really clear that they're saving time by traveling by car. In fact, in my opinion, many people who think they need business English training really could save a lot of time just by watching and really, really internalizing the language in kids' shows like Little Red Tractor. And that would help them become a lot more confident. Another reason kids' shows are great is because you get to listen to lots of interaction, as I said. So when we have a conversation with people, it's a lot like playing tennis. You have to hit the ball to the other person, and then they hit it back to you, and you have to return it. So I'm sure you've had a conversation before when two people are not really listening to each other. They're just speaking at the other person, but they don't respond to what you say. Or maybe you're tired and you didn't really respond to what the other person says. This is really, really common when we're learning a new language because it's very difficult to listen closely to what other people are saying. So if two people are just speaking without connecting or responding to the other person, it's like two people playing tennis and just hitting balls to the other side of the court without returning them. But in a real conversation, everything that everybody says is a direct response to what the previous person said. So it's just like playing tennis with one ball, hitting it back and forth. Okay? So a lot of learners really struggle to respond to other speakers, and they haven't focused on the interaction with other speakers in listening and reading. So a lot of my learners, for example, can read quite challenging academic articles, but they're not so good in conversation and they panic. But kids shows are really, really fantastic models for natural interaction between the speakers. All right, so I'm coming to the end of part 1 of this episode. I'm going to summarize what I think is really, really valuable for you so far. So really, I would recommend you watch kids shows. So some shows that I would recommend: Little Red Tractor, you can find that one on YouTube. Thomas the Tank Engine as well. What's it called in German? Thomas the Tank Engine is a show with little toy trains. And the English one is actually narrated by Ringo Starr, who, as you would know, is the drummer from the Beatles. So yeah, Little Red Tractor, Thomas the Tank Engine, and another show that I would recommend for you is Bluey. Bluey is a beautiful Australian show for even younger children, but it's also enjoyed by a lot of adults who don't have parents. And you can watch Bluey on Disney. I personally love Bluey, and I don't even have any children myself. Bluey, I think, was the most streamed show in 1 year. I'm not sure exactly what the statistics are, but Bluey is really, really one of the most popular shows in the world. And it's just beautiful. I just recommend that you watch it. Maybe check it out on YouTube and see how you go. But when you watch shows like this, really, really make sure that you watch them with subtitles. Because when you watch the shows with subtitles, you need to, you can notice when you haven't understood something. So if you're listening and you haven't understood, you can see the subtitle and you see, oh, that's that word, right? So if you don't understand a word, it could be because you don't know the word, but it could also be because it's a word that you know, but you didn't recognize the pronunciation. Yeah, so in German, people use this phrase, ich habe das akustisch nicht verstanden. So in this situation, what can you do, right? Like if you see, oh, that's a word that I know, but I didn't recognize it, you think, oh, you go back and you listen to the pronunciation again. So in German, a word like fahren is often pronounced fahren, right? Ich bin gefahren. Or einen might be pronounced nen. Ich hätte gern einen Kaffee. So it's really important that you watch shows with subtitles, so you actively listen to see if there's a difference between the pronunciation that you hear and the pronunciation that you expect. Yeah, so a word like actually could be reduced to actually. A word like interesting could be interesting. And it helps you discover if you thought you knew how a word was pronounced, but a different pronunciation is really, really common. Like vegetable, right? A lot of my learners might say vegetable. But if you hear vegetable in a TV show, you will notice that that is the most common pronunciation. All right, that's it for now. Make sure you listen to number 2 next week. So how to learn a language part 2. And then I'm going to start talking about my German learning journey from when I moved to Germany in 2011. So that's it. Thank you very much. Have a great day. See you soon.